So Dan Garrettson has been helping me out for many years. You presented 3 or 4 times for me over the years at different events and whatnot. And Shawn T. Shawn, how do you say your last name? Takatup. Okay, Takatup. I shortened it Shawn T. Sorry.
no worries. I get it. Yeah.
Shawn has started a company called Mozee, and it's mozeealong.com, right? Yeah. And they're going to talk today about intelligent transportation. Dan comes from a perspective of consulting and analyzing what's going on in the marketplace, and Shawn is actually getting involved in creating that vision into something that's actually useful. So looking forward to get us an idea of what you're doing, and then it's going to be open question time after that.
All right. Okay. So yeah, I think I guess just to give a quick intro. So my background, I have a PhD in astronomy, and the real relevance of that is if I ever tell you this isn't rocket science, you know I know what I'm talking about. So my involvement in transportation, logistics, and so forth started. So I've actually been in the space for about 25 years, been doing a lot of consulting, policy work, and so forth as a Forrester research, and did a lot of work early on sort of supply chain and logistics, but also on automotive and connected vehicles and telematics, and a lot of that was happening with commercial vehicles, around 2002 timeframe. Then was involved in a lot of policy work in the Washington D.C. area, and worked with the U.S. Department of Transportation on their connected vehicles program, and input to the White House Office of Science and Technology policy on the future of transportation. And at that point, it was around the time of the DARPA Grand Challenge that got a lot of the autonomous vehicle activity, I guess, really going in many ways, standalone autonomy and so forth. So there was a lot of excitement, but it was still very focused on a lot of the infrastructure, vehicle to infrastructure coordination activities. And that's obviously been transitioning a little bit over the last 15, 20 years. So worked there, went to McKinsey, ran their knowledge portfolio for automotive, semiconductor, and so forth, but a lot of stuff on autonomous vehicles and the applications there. And then more recently been working it really very much in the intelligent transportation system space. So a lot of work on infrastructure and where a lot of that is going, in particular tolling technology, fundraise, sort of, I guess, a lot of the funding of the infrastructure aspects and so forth, and traffic management solutions, corridor management, et cetera. So all sorts of things where that involves, signals, how you coordinate traffic signals, how you coordinate a lot of the vehicle to infrastructure. So my background is very much in that consulting space, and currently working with a couple different ITS companies, intelligent transportation systems, but also doing a lot on the transaction space, working with companies on buy side and sell side activities as they try to sell the companies, with a big focus on logistics. I've done a lot of work on logistics technology, logistics coordination there, but my focus is a lot on how that transitions into the infrastructure coordination and infrastructure management side. So that's my quick background. I don't know if you want to say anything more other than.
Tell us about Mozee. There's a lot of cool stuff going on there.
Yeah, that's exciting.
But how did you get there, though? Tell us a little bit about yourself, sir. To start with.
Yeah, so my background's mostly.
You want to look closer?
Yeah. So my background's mostly in computer science, right? So I majored in CS, minored in mathematics. I actually didn't finish, so I'm a college dropout. But
That's
most of
only
my
between us.
background.
It's okay. There's a lot of us out there.
And then, but yeah, prior to this, I worked in the Department of Defense. So I worked on UAVs, and COVID had hit, right? So, I've got 5 kids, believe it or not. And so, overnight, just, homeschool teacher, just working from home. And so like there was this park that was like 0.2 miles away, and my neighbor, and so I was walking them to and from the park, and my neighbor had a golf cart, never used the golf cart. So I bought the golf cart off the neighbor and decided to make it drive-by-wire, right? So I could actually get the steering and the braking, just to be lazy to take my kids to and from the park, by the way. And then over the course of that year, by November of 2020, I was able to kind of, on a predefined route, take them to and from the park. And that was kind of the birth of Mozee, right? So I wasn't actually planning to do this and to build like autonomous vehicles, but I started to look at that space. There's a lot of people doing it, right? You've got, Elon Musk drilling tunnels underground in Las Vegas. You've got, like lots of companies, focusing heavily on vertical lift off and takeoff. And like this space is like kind of this inflection point. And so, like that was kind of course, in Texas being what it is, right? It's actually a pretty big problem here. And so, that's kind of the genesis of it.
Give us a quick background on Mozee, because there's quite a bit of interesting stuff, especially lately with your company.
Yeah. So we've partnered with a few cities, right? So Frisco, and then we're talking with like the city of Dallas, as well as Peachtree Corners, which is actually 30 minutes outside of Atlanta. So they have like a mile stretch road of, what they kind of clarify as like a smart city, so it's got like the traffic lights as well as the roads have the infrastructure, to kind of, I guess, assist, autonomous driving, which I have like mixed feelings about, which we could talk about later on why I feel that way. But so we're building a purpose-built vehicle like from the ground up. We, kind of look at the industry as like they're taking what's worked for 100 years, they're slapping sensors on it, and that adds novelty, but there's no real like utility to that. Like you've got to, and so we're focused on mostly first and like last mile, right? So just really kind of augmenting, how you get from one point A to point B. And if you look at the data, right, over 60% of Uber and Lyft rides are like 1 to 5 miles. So people aren't even going that far, and then you look at a city like New York, right, where 46%, of the locals there even have a vehicle, and it's because their mass transit system is like one of the best. So it's like, how do you take a model like that and, make a kind of smaller vehicle, but then flavor it, with like autonomy, and that's what we're doing. So, the whole notion of like a geofence part of the city and the vehicle needs to handle everything, that's a hard problem to solve. There's a lot of regulation around it. And then just kind of people's, perception of like autonomy is very like, I'm not, getting in a computer on wheels. Yeah.
All right, so both of you guys are transportation experts, if I could. My next
Or
dream,
one on TV.
all right, we'll leave it at that. My next dream is like a V12, awesome, fast, whatever. I know I'm not going to beat a Tesla because those guys are just fast as all, but I've got that speed in mind. At the same time, I'm kind of asking myself, do I just start saving my money because I'm going to be doing robotaxis? I mean, what's my future look like for say the next 5, 10, so many years? I do realize that by the time I get to the point where my kids are going to grab my keys, I'm still going to have transportation, which is awesome because that wasn't necessarily the case 20 years ago. But where do you see the industry going?
So I would say there's a couple of different time horizons on that, but over the next 5 years, pretty much the same thing. You see what it is. In fact, I was doing a lot of work in the policy world, like I say, around 2008, 2010 timeframe, and I remember we got all excited about autonomous vehicles. Google Car came out and so forth. It was like my kids were young enough at that point that at least the younger kids who now turned 21 was like, oh, they'll never have to learn to drive. Well, obviously that didn't happen. So a lot of the truth, the thing is, I think, we sort of overestimate how quickly the technology will evolve over the short term, but underestimate how long it's going to take over the long term. And I forget who said that, but that's people have made that observation. So I think, near term, it's going to be a lot more sort of incremental stuff. What we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years is more and more so-called ADAS, which is Advanced Driver Automation Systems, I think. So you see you're basically, your car is learning to do, or is getting to the point where it can do more things, follow the lanes more effectively, be better at, stopping and avoiding hitting the car ahead of you, or dealing with traffic situations. So it's just getting incrementally better, and you're going to see more of that. I think over the longer term, and there will be a lot of points where, or at least in certain constrained areas, limited, 1 to 2 mile kind of range, you'll start to see the car to completely drive itself. And obviously there's some capability to that at that level now. if you're willing to trust the vehicle. uh, but it's, I just think you're going to see that. And, over the, 20, 30 years, you're going to see a lot more things where you'll just be able to get in and have a car take you places. But it's going to be an incremental thing. And you look back at some point and realize that, in fact, the change has been sort of pretty major. But the problem, I mean, a big challenge is the technology is actually the easier, not the easier part, but it is there. If I think about it, it's kind of three levels. You've got technology, you've got policy, and you've got user acceptance. The policy is going to have a hard time sort of figuring things out, catching up. The regulators trying to figure out exactly how to think about, setting up the roadways, signage, rights of way, all the rest, liability issues. So that's going to take a while, and then just people becoming comfortable with getting in the car and letting it drive them. So I, like I say, lots of incremental change along the way that in about 20, 30 years will add up to major sort of differences in how we think about getting around. That's my answer. But
yeah, well, I mean, I think that was almost like very, very spot on, and like it even actually aligns with what we're focused on at Mozee, right? Where like we're kind of, like once again focused on first mile and like last mile. And like what I mean by that is, say like you go to, like a football game, right? Like this would allow you to like park further and like pay less, right? Or with Frisco, like they're building the new, like Universal Studios, right? Like this will be the shuttle that once again just takes you to and from the parking lot, right? And so definitely just like little, kind of pockets of opportunity there to one, kind of help with like adoption and show people that you can trust a robot on wheels, at least our robot on wheels. But yeah, so no, yeah.
I'm just curious, where do you have number one son, driver's license, 16, month birthday, 1 month later, totaled the car. Number two, didn't get his license until he's like almost graduated from high school. It was like a couple of days for graduation. Now my daughter, now is begging for a car, 18, are you seeing, I'm seeing kids just aren't driving.
Gen Z trend.
Yeah.
It's the Gen Z trend.
That's what embedding is.
They're not,
It's happening.
Yeah.
we were all driving probably before we were 16.
Yeah.
Now these kids are not even getting driver's
Teens
license.
and 20s don't drive.
Yeah,
They don't have
that's
to.
exactly right. If you look at the data on that, I mean, so there was the baby boomers, and Gen X. Most of our adult life, and I can't remember what the average is, but something like we travel 40 miles a day or something. I don't remember, but it's been pretty consistent. And then you saw millennials took a little bit longer to get up there, but millennials and Gen Z are not getting up to that same level of travel at all, and you're seeing them delaying the time they actually get their license, if they get it at all. My son is 21 and hates to drive. Minimizes going out as much as possible. I see a couple trends on that. First of all, there's a little bit of the safety element that people are just, we've driven into them, the fear of the automobile for some reason. Versus for us, it was much more of a freedom. Hey, I get out and I have the ability to go wherever I want. So there's some of that, but I think the bigger thing is just technology is making it possible for them to be connected to their friends and social communities without having to physically get together in the same way. People still get together, in person as much as they can, but much less so with this generation because they're just constantly, connected to them. So I think that, along with some of the kind of safety mentality and all the rest, despite the fact that vehicles themselves are so much safer than they were, it's still kind of, it's still some of that. So a lot of that coming together are affecting that trend.
So you think, overall IoT, right, is making a difference today as far as being able to, either the generation is going to just completely put their arms around it, which I'm thinking younger, as they grow up with this thing pretty much glued to their palm. So that's just a natural thing to kind of take that into, that dashboard there on the Tesla, which I still like to have everything right here, and I want to control. I'm not ready to give that up. Plus, I love the driving experience. But do you think the technology is at that point with the kids will just sit down and do their thing, walk away? Especially with the last month.
Yeah. So for me, I'm, like right before like Gen Z, right? And so I still experienced the world prior, I guess, like pre-internet or like somewhat pre, internet versus this current generation grew up, completely online, right? So their whole like perception of the world is very different from a whole like communication standpoint, from even a mobility standpoint, right? You can summon a stranger like to come pick you up, right? Even though as a kid you're told not to get in the car with a stranger, right? And so like social norms have like definitely like changed. Like they're like they like I think from their point of view of just being exposed to the internet at such a early age, they're very kind of just accept. I mean, I remember my 5-year-old, like he was it was like a couple of months ago, but he had like a snack in his hand, and I have a Tesla, right? And so he had just nonchalant asked me to put the car on autopilot to open this for him. And that's such a foreign thing. It's like he's just like, it's just the way of life, right? It's like, Dad, like, can you put the car on autopilot so then you can open my bag of chips? And like he doesn't understand like that is such a, it's like that is not a normal thing to say. It's like, Dad, have the car drive itself, so that you can open the bag of chips.
I'm
Right?
just curious, in the room here, I mean, we're all technology guys, but are we willing to give up the wheel?
Yes.
Sit on the other side? I mean,
Yeah,
absolutely.
We long.
do it, already do it.
I'm a V12 guy, man. I want the gas. I want the rocket.
Version 5.
Yeah. Sex in driver, subject.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I saw that.
You were just. Driverless car. They just meet in the car to have sex.
Are you kidding me?
On the internet, it's gotta be true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I saw that article.
That is awesome.
Policy there.
That definitely leads me to my question for Mozee. Does it have air conditioning?
Oh yeah.
I mean, because
Yeah.
Yeah, so our vehicle actually cools down the entire cabin within 2 minutes from the door opening. Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, so we actually have this like RV like kind of AC unit. I mean, it's like hidden, right? But like overkill, like for the actual cabin space. But yeah, because like Texas heat and the doors, opening and closing, like yeah. So definitely AC.
how is it connecting to
Connecting in terms of
cellular? Like how is
yes,
cellular?
cellular. Yep. Yeah. And there's also like what do you call it, like cell points at each like loading and unloading zone to upload telemetry data, occupancy data, things like that. So.
The point that you made about having an autonomous shuttle
Mhm.
in the universal parking lot
Yeah.
going back and forth,
Yeah.
that hits upon an issue I've had with cars that drive themselves.
Mhm.
It is quite straightforward from a technology perspective to have autonomous cars as long as everything around them is geared towards supporting them. And I'm referring to the V2V and the V2I and the V2X technologies. That is pretty straightforward. We have the technology to do that.
Right.
The issue comes when you are having these autonomous vehicles coexist with human vehicles on existing roads.
That's already getting better.
That is a much harder problem. And in my opinion, it is quite intractable. No amount of machine learning is going to help you prepare for the idiot driver who's going to do really idiotic things.
But that's no difference than you having to deal with the idiot driver, though, too. So
No, but it is
It
quite
is.
different. It is quite different.
I would
because
say, I
your
would argue no.
intelligence- Because
It's
your
not.
intelligence is going to be far superior to whatever you're putting it in there. And all the
But I'm telling you that Waymo and other companies are starting to use pilots today to start building in those same intelligent factors and decisions, and the computer can do it more quickly than you can to react.
I think this gets at actually what I think is a very interesting fundamental philosophical point of how you're building Mozee. With
but my point is,
if I'm correct on that.
but my point is this: it is a much harder problem to have regular drivers coexist with autonomous vehicles than having a completely autonomous vehicles on roads which are geared to support them. I mean, like I have seen a number of tests in Europe where you have these trucks and buses which have all of these road signs which support them.
Right.
It's a lot more. It's a much more difficult problem. Yes, to your point, Chris, there is progress, but it makes it.
I think your point becomes super relevant. What I call last step, when you get to that last bit where you have to unload and when you have to deal with variables that it can't deal with on the input for the AI. So, which leads me to the question I was going to ask, which is very similar to this, is that last step when you have to go to docks, when you have to deal with the people unloading and offloading people and dealing with stimuli that are outside of what the AI/ML routines can handle. Like it can handle, honestly, weird drivers because there's some predictive elements that you can kind of deal with in the environmental variables within a road. But when you get to loading and unloading zones, docks, all these where things get really complicated and it has too many variables to deal with, how do you deal with that, what I'm calling that last step problem? Because that is very true what he was saying, is that you're at a point where the AI/ML, it cannot deal with it, and probably will never be able to deal with what I'm calling the last step problem. That you're in a scenario where there's way too many variables to even think of handling versus a controlled highway scenario, right?
Yeah, that's a very loaded question, but I'm
It
going
is.
to answer it because it's a common question that actually quite comes up to us, right? Well, one, and like especially in like the U.S., right? Like cities are built around especially in a state like Texas, and so to do something like say even like dedicated lanes, right? Speaking towards that, Peachtree Corners has a dedicated lane for autonomous vehicles, which is fine and dandy, great, but that's not the reality of how our roads infrastructure are, right? So a couple of things have to happen that we're doing very differently than like a Waymo 6 approach. I kind of briefly talked about the geofencing, right? But there's this like rebellion or group of people in like in like the Bay Area that are just slapping cones on top of the GM Cruise vehicles because they don't want them, right? But a big part of that is, GM is just kind of, dropping them in the city, right? And they have to, like figure it out. And they're, blocking lanes. They're, crashing into like city buses, right? And so they're, it's imperative that you work with your cities, on, making, these kind of like routes, right? It's important on where you're actually, from a whole like autonomy, perspective, right? So our vehicles are on, like predefined routes. We've done lots of testing on trying to minimize where we put these vehicles, what like routes they're taking, right? And so by, having a combination of your like deployment and then our training too is also very, very different, right? So we heavily use a bunch of Unreal Engine 5 to actually, make lots of, like simulations on just stuff that would never happen, right? So it's like, what is the vehicle like going to do if there's, 500 people walking across the street and it's raining and it's fog and there's 3 tornadoes, right? It's like, that would probably never happen, but what is the vehicle like going to do? So lots of training there, we've got a good portion of Dallas map, a good portion of Rio map, and we just actually basically build a virtual kind of vector space of, these routes and just run a bunch of like simulations on it. And I got to tell you, it's getting really good. We're also using stable diffusion to actually just, basically like that helps us, come up with things that, as humans, like we wouldn't even think to do, right? And so I think let me kind of wrap this up, but by, focusing on, like what is your like deployment strategy look like? What does your training strategy look like for the vehicle, and working closely with like the cities, and like the businesses, like that'll kind of ease adoption as well as just, it's just a more like sensible way to do it. So
I think that also to get at some of what you were saying, Chris, on that last step and so forth.
Yeah.
There is a question in general, people talk about, I don't know how if you're familiar with the model of sort of level 1, level 2, level 3, et cetera, autonomy, level 5 autonomy where things deal with itself, deal with every situation. And I think Shawn and I would agree on this, that level 5 is a bit of maybe a pipe dream, at least it's a long ways off.
Agreed.
But you've got the ideas of trying to break this down into different places. Where can you solve it? I think with logistics, where people are working on very much subsets of that. I mean, I've got Waymo and Aurora now, I guess no longer, but working on the autonomous trucks between here in Houston and all the rest. They're starting with highways for a reason. That is a simpler environment to deal with. And I know of companies that are working specifically on what's called the drayage problem of getting from a port to a transfer point, and all you have to deal with is that vehicle going from the one location to the other place, the second location. That's still a controlled environment, but then you start to manage and have professionals deal with it and breaking down the problems in that way. And I think of the last mile delivery problem, where you've got the little kind of fun robot going around the sidewalks and so forth, and he gets up to your house and has to sit there and wait until somebody comes out, takes the pizza out, or whatever.
So you bring up the interesting point of how to handle the exceptions. So once autonomy has to end and get to that exception process, the strategies that you're going to have to take, and then both from a regulatory perspective, and as you mentioned, regulatory is not ready for this at all.
Can you
But
kind of summarize the questions so people in the back can hear?
yeah, so now that autonomy is going to have to end at some point, and when you go into exception process, the regulatory is not ready to handle it. But what thoughts and ideas do you have around what's that exception process look like? Because let me give some specific examples. So Waymo gets you to the trucking depot, but you're going to have to probably have a person take over to do that last step to get it to the dock ready for unloading or unloading, or exception process where you'll have geofence boundaries, that you're kind of stating. But if you wanted to go beyond a boundary across, say, municipalities, and you have multiple systems that you have to interact with, or weird things that are going to hit exception processes, what kind of strategies are you guys thinking about to deal with when autonomy ends and some point of intervention has to happen?
Yeah, just to summarize the question on that. So the question is, you've got autonomy happening in different domains.
Yeah.
And there's different touch points between them, whether it's getting to the dock and the truck having to back into the dock and dealing with the folks unloading it. In the case of the trucks going to the depot, or dealing with a robotaxi going from municipality to municipality and having to interface with just one set of systems in one location instead of with another.
Yeah.
Dealing with those kind of touch points and endpoints, the strategies for that. It's probably a little bit more in Shawn's domain. I mean, I think a lot of it's also case by case, almost example by example. You're going to have to, how do I deal with it on the unloading environments in a depot, or getting somebody to get their pizza out of it, on the final delivery, or or whatever. So I think you'd almost have to go case by case as to kind of what that is, and that's kind of the whole point of the, we're going to solve it more at a level 4 autonomy level and well-defined domains before we're going to get to that full autonomy environment.
No, yeah, and to that point, Ken, I don't think we'll ever get to level 5. And people look at me like I'm crazy, but
No,
a
I think
lot
you're
of
right.
things have to happen for us to get to level 5. And one of those things is every vehicle on the road has to be able to communicate with each other. And I don't, I just don't see, all of the large OEMs playing ball. It's like Ford and GM are not going to work together to make that happen, right? So, the reality is, well, I don't think we'll ever get to a level 5 state. I think there'll be a lot of hopefully Mozee, is kind of the next gen light rail system, or because our vehicles are on a trolley track, right? So it's on a predefined route. But in terms of adoption, I think the big reason why a lot of people are kind of stand off on it is just because they haven't experienced it, right? unless you live on the West Coast and you've got rider credits to, maybe, book a ride, or in Austin now, right? Or you have a Tesla and pay the $15,000 to maybe get access to a beta. No one's really, kind of experienced autonomy, right? I remember the first week I even had it, I was terrified, but then by week 2, I'm, sitting there like listening to my podcast, right? Like not touching the wheel. So it just takes.
I had a similar experience. It was very scary at first.
Right. Yeah. So it's just, people just haven't.
So what's the roadblocks for level 4?
Well, for us, so technically our vehicles are what they classify as like level 4. So it has the hardware, so all the, sensors for it. It's just that we've limited like the vehicle on purpose, like to just be on, kind of fixed routes.
Well, and you've limited the environment, which I think is really key to what your company is doing, which is also interesting.
Oh, he made a point in passing that I wanted to play off of, but I think plays into the kind of future thing. One of the things that I think is really interesting about something like, what Mozee's doing and other sort of related companies, you think about, there's this ongoing thing about, how we're going to extend Dart and, build out the rails and so forth. One of the things I think that's really exciting about the autonomous future at some level is the how do you actually deal with like public transit. Public transit, I think, is more like an autonomous robotaxi than it is building more light rail and so forth. And in fact, you've seen this for decades, if not probably a century or more. This whole conflict of how do you lay rail in and having to then differentiate that from the dumb pavement that's the roadways where you've got people controlling it versus something going along a rail, rights of way issues. And of course, Dart is hugely expensive to do any extension and so forth. But now you've got autonomy coming along, and you can, map it out, get it very clearly defined, maybe have it operating in a specific environment, but you become effectively a new type of transit system that takes advantage of that dumb pavement, and you can start to coexist if you manage the environment appropriately with the non-autonomous systems and so forth. But it starts to provide all the benefits of vehicle on demand, and probably even better benefits of being a little more flexible. You could redo the routes at any point and reroute the vehicle, so you start to change the bus line, so to speak. And so, part of my thought on this is like part of where this goes in the future is like any city thinking about a new light rail project should totally look at autonomy first, and probably abandon it, frankly, because it's going to be horrendously expensive to get the benefits that something like Mozee or companies like that can provide at a much sooner time frame and in a much better way.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Is the technology all on board, or are you reliant on cities' Wi-Fi?
No, so it's
it's all on board.
Yeah, it's all on board. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because not every city, has the infrastructure like say Frisco or
Okay. Follow-up question or another question is batteries being combustible. Is there going to be a solution for that on the autonomous vehicles?
We're assuming yours are electric. Is that
Yes.
true?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's going to be a solution for fire retardants for the combustion. I mean, that's like, the news now. Anytime there's an accident, it explodes into big fire.
Yeah. We should probably look into that. I'm like, looking really about
You-
something.
But you recently did crash testing, right? Did they blow up? I think that's also important.
Monitor their performance and using predictive analytics to find out how that happens, to monitor the heat of the battery.
So
thermal management.
Yeah. So we just did our crash testing. So we're approved up to 45 miles an hour. And out of the 5 vehicles that we destroyed, which I was just looking at all the money that we're burning, but none of the actual batteries actually exploded. So we use I'm not going to mention their name, but they're based out of Arizona, and actually the original Tesla Model S. So we use the same manufacturer for that. So, but yeah, none of the batteries exploded. So
45 miles. Yeah.
There's interesting. You can look up when AT&T was called Southwestern Bell. They put in their RT lithium battery.
Yeah.
And it's go look on the internet, and I forgot how many. It's in the thousands. They had to replace because every time the battery got wet, in rain or something, the water can, it exploded, it caused houses.
But cars explode too.
Yeah.
Gasoline's very explosive.
The V12
Well,
has,
but in
you know, the rocket fuel that I'm
But
using.
there's also new chemistries that they're working on that are less volatile. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things happening in the marketplace that will change the issue with the lithium batteries. If you don't have a good thermal management system, then yeah, you can have runaway and blow up. But with the new chemistries, they're much more reliable. Marty, did you have a question?
Shawn, you mentioned, phones, right?
Yeah.
Putting on cars,
Yeah.
right? Which is an example of adversarial external environment for walls, right?
Right.
So I read yesterday, there's an app for guard. And, passenger was saying, hey, I'm uncomfortable. I can hit a button and within a stop or two, an officer, guard officer, that he could operate. Surely, we, for 20 to 200 years, will be facing people having fun, that's in the limit of autonomous vehicle.
Yep.
Thought about how to involve or these. Yeah, because you're not going to be able to simulate maybe couple words. Maybe we come up with ideas, but I think teenagers are pretty effective highlights for making AI. How are you going to deal with that project?
Yeah, so like really good question. So yeah, we've definitely spent quite a deal of time with with the city, so chief of police for Frisco and a few other cities, and we're actually doing so if there is a cabin camera inside the vehicle, and we're definitely doing some wizardry, like we're doing a lot of things there to like detect certain things.
Violence detection, things like that.
Huh? I'm sorry.
Like they have violence detection now on the
No,
cameras.
so we don't have a model for that yet, but like being able to detect if someone is gonna leaves the bag, we don't have that. but like say like spills, right? Say they like throw off or they spill something, the vehicle will after the drop off go back to like the
For
service
maintenance?
center and get service. So we have models that actually detect spills. Inside the vehicle as well, like there's like a rider support button. So if they do feel uncomfortable, they can hit that button or just go through the app, right? And just hit the button. And then like a rider support, like a real human will actually, drop in and, basically, check in on the passengers. So we're like working on like some things on like how to, mitigate that, but people, having sex in the vehicle is something that we haven't.
So they have detection for violence, for guns, and all kinds of other objects.
Yeah. So we had tested some like open source models, and there was a huge like regression in our model. So it was like flagging, like was it one of the guys had like a Yeti like cup in the and it like flagged.
It's
like,
a gun.
It like freaked out, right? And so we're like, okay, like let's take a step back. So we're testing those things, but yeah.
But the difference between a hug and somebody grappling is difficult to tell the difference.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Road rage. You're going down the road at whatever.
Yeah.
Joe's behind you in his V12. Doing whatever. Of course, the flip side of that is you're sitting there with road raging with an autonomous vehicle and you drive by and you're like, oh, great.
It's no one to flip off.
Nobody to flip off, whatever. So I was just curious. Yeah, what's
there you go.
that's the human side. I mean, you're gonna have humans on the road with autonomous. How's that being addressed, I guess?
That's precisely my point. I mean, the vehicles by themselves are fine. It is a coexistence with human drivers is the real problem. That's the challenge.
Yeah, like for us, so like we've got some external things that we're like doing to like, so we've done some testing with like, just blatantly, like cutting off our like vehicle and stuff. And after a number of times of that, it will basically call for help. And so a rider support club, person basically takes over, right? So like they can like remote control the vehicle from anywhere. And so in that sense, like that's kind of our plan B. Like, you know, basically a human would just step in. Now, for the first pilot, we will have like a safety steward there, so kind of like a pilot, like they're kind of just there for if something goes south. But
That's
you
the
know,
Waymo model, essentially.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also, you know, regulation too, like, you know, you can actually operate a autonomous vehicle in all 50 states as long as you have someone behind the wheel, right? This is how Tesla like is able to roll out their full self-driving, because there's still someone behind the wheel. Right. So, but yeah, so short term is we do have a human there. I guess long term is, you know, the vehicle will ask for help, and, you know, and I'm sure we'll learn, you know, quite a bit for our first 2 pilots anyway. Yes.
When does your pilot roll out?
So right now we're just waiting on NHTSA to give us the waiver. So,
And it's going in Frisco?
yeah,
Okay.
Frisco, and then we've got a pilot with JP Morgan at their Plano hub, and then in January we've got Peachtree Corners.
Where, what?
Peachtree Corners. Just
Oh,
right
in
over.
Atlanta?
Yeah.
Okay.
How many vehicles have you produced so far?
Like the pilot or like just to crash?
How about, first of all, I guess it's 2-part. How many have you killed and how many have you created?
So like we've destroyed like 8, and then we've got 3 to pilot.
Do you cry a little bit each time one's destroyed?
Yeah,
Like,
because
it's
it's just
like you're
fucking-
like
well,
it's
you
daddy.
have to do it. Yeah. Just cry. Yeah.
Simple question.
Yeah.
Do you have a video or something to show what you have produced today for us?
I didn't bring my like something like
Or
told me to do that. Yeah.
like a website or something?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if you go to our like LinkedIn page and stuff, like, you know, but there is like a video of like the crash testing and stuff.
Did you post it? I didn't know.
Yeah.
I know you showed it to me. I didn't know if you posted. It is.
I think it's
We should
posted.
probably pull it up to watch. It is pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
So I'm really curious to see. And the second question I have is, is there any plan or anything you have in place to influence the policymakers or the regulators? I know it's highly regulated and they are not on board, but is there any strategic plan to influence that?
So it's actually fairly interesting that you say that, because I think externally, like a lot of people are like, there's a lot of regulation, which like there is, but all of the cities that we've been like dealing with and stuff, like they've been very like receptive to it, especially Texas. I don't know, like everyone's been very like receptive to it, right? And so we actually haven't ran into a lot of, you know, like blockers on trying to like deploy our vehicles. Like it's been actually a pretty great experience for us. But I think the reason why is because we've been so kind of hyper focused on, we want to partner with you. Like, let's actually work like together, you know, on, you know, and then second, a lot of cities need this, right? I mean, if you look at just North Texas in general, take like the city of McKinney, there's enough road just to go, you know, like to go from here to New York. There's no transit system like whatsoever. There's no light rail system. So they need something like this, right? You know, Arlington, Texas, largest city in the entire country, no mass transit, like there's nothing, you know? And so a lot of the cities like that we're like approaching, we know they have a real problem, like when it comes to, you know, like transit. And so it's been a pretty easy sell for us.
Yeah, I think, I've been doing a lot on the regulatory environment and so forth. And I think, you know, that's generally the case where a lot of the cities they're actually very excited about what the possibilities are. Now, there's a lot, you know, you have people in, let's say, San Francisco or, you know, wherever that may be a little close to it. So you have some of those barriers, but I know, you know, talking to Frisco and economic development there, they're saying it is, they're trying to be very technology forward. They're trying to sort of really attract a lot of the cutting edge technology firms and see this as a way to start to differentiate themselves from a positioning standpoint. You know, they're all trying to compete with getting talented companies that are coming as well.
Right, and so all of that is good until the first incident happened and someone sues the city, and then they're dealing with millions of dollars or something, and then the regulators are heavily on it.
Yeah, so what we're doing, and maybe I will regret saying this with all the deals that we have, but we take full like responsibility. So like if something were to happen, say in like Frisco actually, so like we had to sign a bunch of legal jargon that we basically take full like responsibility, right? So like the cities won't get penalized for it, we will.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Dan, you mentioned a good point on basically replacing the tracks with roadway? Is it a lot less expensive? Because like, I guess I saw this week where City of Dallas and Fort Worth are looking at building light rail between them. And then I just looked earlier this year, Amtrak, our taxes are funding a study for a grant for Amtrak from Texas to New York. Is it going to be a lot less expensive if we just build dedicated roadways for autonomous vehicles, like on our tollways where you've got the express lanes, do a autonomous vehicle?
I think, if you're looking at dedicated roadways, I'm not sure that the expense is all that different, although down pavement is a little easier than rail, but still, you still got the big expense in laying a lot of that is the right of ways, just dealing with all the sort of touch points between the rail and the regular roadways and so forth. And what the autonomous systems allow is it's basically the same infrastructure. And maybe you do make it a dedicated lane at some point, but then it's dual use. It's like, oh, hey, this route is not really working. Let's turn it back over, and we need to reroute things. So we sort of redo where it's dedicated. But ideally, it's a point where it's not even dedicated.
Yeah, and when it's one manufacturer of these trains, it can go away because you can have competition through different autonomous vehicles for the route.
Yeah, the trains, the rail systems, I mean, they're just horrendously expensive. I mean, just think about you're laying this track for, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles. It's horrendously, even if it's not a right-of-way issue in the middle of, nowhere America, which has its own problems, why would you be laying rail there? But it's still just horrendously expensive to lay and maintain that track versus dump pavement, which is easier to maintain, and you have the intelligence in the vehicle. So that whole thing, if we can, again, we have to solve autonomy in specific environments. A highway environment is a relatively, I wouldn't say easy, but easier environment than let's say a city, busy city street. You can start to solve autonomy there, and that becomes a lot less expensive solution than actually having a dedicated rail system that can't be used for anything else.
Well, pitch that, because I'd much rather my tax dollars go with forward-moving technology than spending it for one company to build something that is going to be antiquated.
Right. And so the other, exactly. And that's the big problem with rail as well, is you can't reroute it at will.
Yeah.
Like you can't just say, oh, we need to change the route that we're going to another, set of roads that's already here, because you then have to build the new rail.
Don asked a question.
Like the high-speed rail between Dallas and Houston, go 100 miles an hour versus a car.
But you could also just get on a plane and fly even faster.
Until you get to the terminal.
But the de facto transit is still rail.
Yeah, exactly.
Our whole transportation is actually built around rail. Everything from our trucks to our boats to our everything. I mean, but
yeah.
How you're buying capstones is helping.
Shawn, do you have a capstone team?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you give us a 30-second commercial on that?
Yeah. So we've got six UCD students working on our passenger sense camera, which is that cabin camera that I was talking about earlier. And it's actually going really, really well. So we actually got, I think we got second place for the judging that happened last week. But yeah, I mean, awesome. It's going fantastic, and we're already talking about doing another capstone project with.
Well, Shawn, you better hurry, because for the first time ever, all of our engineering projects are fully subscribed for the fall, and you haven't sent your proposal to Marco yet. It's never happened before.
computer science is still open though.
Yeah, that's a great milestone. Yeah.
I'm just curious about your hardware. From a fault tolerant perspective, mil spec, black box, as in the aircraft, to what level are you guys doing this stuff at this point? Because I want that vehicle running 24/7, just like I had that telephone back in the day.
Right.
You pick up, you get dial tone. Last thing I want is my computer to crash.
Yeah.
What kind of fault tolerance are you building into the systems?
Yeah, so we do have kind of a black box, that is, always like recording, right? And so pretty much like there's like three brains for the vehicle, right? So, there's one kind of brain, controlling the outside experience, so it's, all of its object labeling, notation, reception handling. So all that's being done by one single, separate modular brain. And then we've got another brain that handles, all of the inside experiences, right? So there's like screens on the inside of the vehicle, and I can show all this after this, but that's giving, like route information. It's, handling like temperature control system, right? So like the customer can actually set what their like desired temp is, inside of the app, and the vehicle like climates like to that temp, right? Now the vehicle can fit like 12 people sitting or standing. So I mean, it's kind of it's like a poster on wheels. I actually don't like it, but the cities love it. Like this, it's like a mini shuttle type looking like bus. And so we've got that brain, and then we've got a different brain that handles all of the MCU, like VCU, all the electronics there. In terms of how it's actually, handling like the steering and the braking and stuff. So like a portion of the team, it's ex Waymo, ex Tesla guys, and so I like to think that like we have a pretty strong, solid team, that have already done this for large, companies, and so we're kind of taking those disciplines, building them into our vehicle, but everything is separate, right? So or modular, right? So it's built to,
Okay, one last question.
So we
You
want-
gotta ask? Yeah. Great, you.
Yeah, what's your car builder? I'm assuming you bought the car from Tesla or other GM. Are you building your own car for this?
So yes and no. And the reason why I say yes and no is so at Mozee, we only focused on like the actual software piece, and then we've partnered with a vehicle like design firm called Lotus. Like they're actually based in just the Dallas Design District. And so like they're actually helping us do all of the actual fabrication and tooling. But then there are other partners that are also helping us, right? So there's another partner in Retta, that is like doing our body panels, right? And then there's another part, and like all these partners do this for, like they do like fabrication and like prototyping for, like Ford, Ralph, Toyota. And so because where a lot of companies in our space get in a lot of trouble is they'll raise a ton of capital, which is great, but they're also trying to own it all, right? So they'll like, build their own drivetrain and like hub motors, which I understand like the pride that comes with that, but there's a lot of great partners out there who one like want to do something like this, and second are willing to work with you to like do something like that. So like while yeah.
So to
Awesome.
basically provide software and become the service company.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, will you guys be able to stay a little while and talk? Guys, thanks for coming. We'll get to visit here. We have the room as long as you like.